Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, for the humanitarian organizations working in the region, there is a little hope of desperately needed cash now. With us now is Massa Mufti, Chief Executive of Sambola, an NGO providing education for Syrian refugees, particularly refugee children in Lebanon. And in Westminster, Abdallah Al-Dadari from the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Western Asia. They're putting together a plan to help rebuild Syria once the civil war ends. He was also Syria's Deputy Prime Minister for Economic Affairs from 2005 to 2011. And Massa Mufti, what's interesting is that you are from civil society. For the first time, you seem to have equal billing with all the nations that have gathered in this aid conference. So if I were a Syrian inside Syria, what would the promise of $10 billion today mean?
First, it doesn't mean much as long as there are still attacks on civilians and on health and schools facilities. As long as there's still countries and regions and villages under siege, doesn't mean anything. It's not about money. Even the donors, even the heads of states came and said bluntly and openly, it's not about just giving money. As long as there are attacks and people are still killed, it doesn't mean anything. But it's a good start. That what happened today is amazing because there was a common solidarity and common will by all the countries with a huge consensus that they don't want to give up on the Syrian people, on building and strengthening the resilience of the Syrian people, which is so important. While we are witnessing that the talks in Geneva have been suspended, we're talking here about making hope happen.
Right. Abdallah Dadari, I'm wondering what your reaction is. Would today have involved many of the people who are bombing, like the Americans, the Russians, the French, the British? I mean, are the same people that are bombing at the same time promising money to garner help for the refugees below?
Well, at least they're promising money for the refugees. It's better than just bombing without promises. Today is a turning point in a sense because the nature of the conference is moving gradually, not just for humanitarian aid. It's also looking at resilience. It's also looking at jobs. It's also looking at education as a very important theme. And also for the first time, I must say, they asked us to talk about what about the future, what about planning for the future. And I think that was a very strong signal that if there is peace, it's a signal to the belligerents in the Syrian conflict that if there is peace, the international community is ready to stand by Syrians in the reconstruction effort. I think it was a very strong signal today.
Well, of course, you're going to be a key player in that reconstruction when it comes. I'll come back to you a moment when we want to look at the future, but I want to talk at the present. I mean, this means presumably that you can actually build schools, you can actually pay teachers, you can develop much more permanent, if you like, educational resources for these 750,000 children who are not being educated.
Well, there was first a pledge about really ensuring that by 2016, 2017, all children, all Syrian children out of school will be in school. And there is a common also consensus that there will be mobilization of all the resources and cost-effective and innovative way of making that solution happen. It's a huge burden on governments and hosting countries of refugees. So we have to mobilize on schools, not building schools. There are other less costly way of really ensuring that children do get an education. So existing premises, schools in Lebanon and Turkey and Jordan, as well as engaging the non-formal education sector as a way of complementing as well, and something
and better places for people to actually live. I mean, we've seen them, some of the refugee camps, they really are still very tented. I mean, is there a chance that they will be given proper sanitation, more permanent buildings? And will it in the end persuade them that it's worth staying in the region because they can live a life before they go home?
Well, livelihood was very much discussed at depth. There's a switch as Dr. Abdullah said, there is a huge switch between just addressing the crisis from a humanitarian perspective towards moving into development. So wherever they end up being, there is really a talk about providing livelihood and job for their dignity.
Dr. Abdallah, then let's just look to the future, and heaven knows when it will come. But when it does, for the United Nations, you will certainly have a role in attempting to pull things together. How do you think we get from here to there?
Well, there is so much work that could be done now in planting the seeds of the future. First, there is this shift towards more focus on resilience education and maintaining the skills and competencies of Syrians, whether Syrian teachers, like Masa was saying, and Syrian students, and ensuring their education is going to be extremely important. Another shift that's starting to happen is to think about, for example, agriculture in Syria rather than just food aid. Syria is an agricultural country and it probably was the only Arab self-sufficient country in food. So bringing these ideas to the table again will prepare the country for rebuilding later on down the road.
Well, let me ask you this, because you're a rare individual. You've actually been a deputy prime minister in Syria. How do you think President Assad will view today's developments?
Well, first of all, let me say clearly that I made it very clear today that even if the money is available, there needs to be dramatic governance reforms in order to absorb that money. There needs to be accountable and responsible and transparent institutions. There needs to be inclusive political economy in Syria which would allow Syrians to negotiate their priorities. Therefore, it's not a question, at least from our perspective in planning for the future of individuals, it's a question of institutional setups and governance reforms that without which there is no rebuilding of Syria. I have to make that message very clear. So even if the money could become available, and we are talking about $180 billion for the next 10 years just to regain the 2010 GDP levels, even if that money becomes available, without dramatic changes in the governance structure and institutional changes, this thing is not going to happen.
Dr. Darari, thank you very much indeed for joining us, and Masa Mufti, thank you too, and good luck.
Thank you.
I've been getting away with it all.